All right, hi there, class. This is the lecture for Chapter 8, which is about marketing research. To start off, this is our quote of the week from Philip Kotler. He's the author of Marketing Management, a marketing classic. He says, "No company in its right mind tries to sell to everybody." And this is like the quote of the week last week, where we were talking about um, being able to be focused and how critical that is to have to be successful. Chapter 8 is about the marketing research required and how some of the marketing research options differ internationally than they do domestically. Here's the cliff notes as always. Okay, so to start off, big question. What is marketing research? Why do we do it? Why do we care about it? And as we take a look at that, this is really super critical when we're looking at international markets, because this is our lens into understanding the consumer in the foreign market. This is where all of the things that are different about them culturally um, and where we're looking at our SRCs and the things that are different between the target culture and the domestic culture start to show up. This is how we find those things out and how we tell. So the ultimate reason why we're doing this research is not just to become culturally aware, not just to become good global citizens, but to make a decision about whether or not we even want to bring our product into the new market. I know some of you in your country notebooks, you jumped into those and said, you know what, actually, what we've discovered is that our product might not be a good fit, and so we want to pivot and do something different. Totally okay. It's way more important that this decision happens in the research stage than after you've dedicated all the resources it takes to actually launch a product and find that you got it wrong. And even though the countries differ, the process for doing marketing research is really the same in any market. Um, Here's the textbook definition. You can notice this is we've got a little pencil icon there. This is a potential test question, but this is it. It's just how we get all the data together in order to make decisions about what we're going to do with our marketing. Are we going to launch this project or not? Are we going to message our product this way or not? Now, when we're doing international marketing research, the additional complications that we face are that we have to communicate across cultural boundaries, and so that includes language, it includes perceptions, it includes all of the things we've talked about in terms of etiquette and what's appropriate and what's not, and then also the environment. So there may not be the same infrastructure, there may not be the same tools, may not be the same resources in one market to another. So these are levels of marketing research. How much do we need to understand? So the general level, right? Just the basics. This is like the Wikipedia entry for a country. It's going to tell us the playing field on which we're intending to play when we launch our product. Then what of those things are in motion? So when we look at trends, right, the social trends, economic trends, consumer trends, industry trends, we're talking about our demographics moving? Is the economy getting stronger or weaker? Does the disposable income for the average person in the target market, is that changing? What are consumers favoring? Are they, are there fads and other types of trends that we need to be aware of to either ride and get in front of, or to steer clear of? And then finally, decisions around the marketing mix. So once we understand the culture that we're going to be communicating in, then we need to make decisions about how we're going to deliver that message. What marketing channels are we going to use in order to get our message across to consumers, and which ones are appropriate based on the new market? Marketing research is necessary because a foreign marketer may have no familiarity, context, or background which are relevant to the target market. So here's Batman and Robin. We surveyed 250 people and did 10 in-depth interviews. If this works in Scandinavia, it will be a success. Wham! Sloppy marketing research. So the point being is that you really need to dig in and understand what's happening in this market, and also recognize that you don't automatically know. Your hunches and your gut, your experience in another market may not be relevant in the new market. Okay, this is the 6-step process that outlines how marketing research is done, no matter which country you're doing it in. So at the very beginning, we define the problem. So we say this is what we want to know. This is how what we are guessing is going to be the critical information that affects our product in this market. And then we're establishing objectives for the research. So this is, at the end of this research, we want to know X, and that will inform our decision about whether we enter the market or not. Second, we're going to look for, so how are we going to get this information? What are all the possible ways that we could get this? What wells can we go to draw information about the target market? Take a look at the cost. So before we actually dedicate resources to doing this research, we're going to look at the budget. Do we have enough money? Is it going to be super expensive? Are we going to have to hire people in order to conduct surveys or focus groups? Are we going to be able to do a lot of this research online? And right here, this is a stage gate. This is an opportunity to say, hey, even doing the research to find out if it's worth going into this market is going to be too expensive to make it worth it for us to actually move forward. And so here's a point where we could stop. Okay, then we're into the research phase. Gather the necessary information from both primary and secondary sources, every place we can get it. Analyze, interpret, and summarize the results. So now we have all this data. What is the data telling us? What's the story that it's communicating about the reality of how consumers make purchases and purchasing decisions on the ground? And then finally, we need to take all of that and communicate it to the other decision makers in the company. This is really what we're doing in terms of the country notebook assignment. Your presentations are number 6. This is where you've done the research and you're analyzing your product in the new market based on the criteria of the assignment and coming back to the group and myself and saying, hey, this is what we found. And these are the things that we ought to consider as we make the decision about whether or not to launch the product. So let's walk through each of these a little bit. Defining the problem is the very first thing. What's the problem and what are the objectives of the research? Make sure that you cover the full range. So it's easy to get siloed. Say, hey, maybe we think that the key problem is only this, but that may not be broad enough to really give you an assessment of the market. So again, really critical. Watch out for biases and your self-referencing criterion. Things about your own culture that might lead you astray in understanding a new culture. Determining the available sources, kind of covered that. Cost benefit, is it worth even entering this market, or is it even worth entering the project to do the research to enter the market? Now, number 4 had to do with gathering data from all sources, primary and secondary. So let's talk a little bit about what the difference is between primary and secondary data. This might seem counterintuitive, but I think it will be an easier way to approach it. So the first thing is, what's the problem with secondary data? First off, I'm assuming that you guys are familiar with what primary and secondary data are, but essentially primary data are things where you went to the source to find out. So that is, I went and I interviewed this consumer that was representative of this demographic. I have the interview, I have the data, I have the relationship. Secondary data would be things like, I went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and I got their research. It's coming to me secondhand. I didn't actually conduct this research, but here's somebody who did, and I'm using their research. So revisiting the question, what are some problems that we might have with secondary data? One is that we might not have any. In the U.S., there are a lot of, like I mentioned, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There are lots of government agencies that are collecting and reporting data all the time. And this is everything from the SEC, who's reporting on stock information, to the Department of Education, the Department of Labor. There is just a ton of data available about the United States. Well, if I go to another country, if I go to Mongolia, for example, I may not have access to the same level. I may not have access to any of the data that I have in the United States, but the data that I have, I may not have. It may not be collected at the same standard. It may not be at the same quality, which leads us to reliability. Who collected the data and why did they collect it? Was it collected by the government? Was it collected by a private party? In either case, do those parties have a reason that it might be to their advantage to make a misrepresentation? Excuse me. So there could be a motive for overstating or understating the data. This could be an example. Maybe I'm looking at like human rights violations in China, and it's possible that the Chinese government is collecting these statistics, and their data may be less reliable than, say, for instance, Amnesty International, who has a reason for, a motive for the data to be accurate. And then comparability. So let's say that I'm used to operating under a certain type of research data that I get in the United States or my home country, and then I go to a new target market and I get additional data, but they're not exactly the same. So it may make it that may affect my decisions. For instance, maybe I'm saying, okay, there's 135 million households in the United States, and in the United States, a household is calculated a certain way. Then I go to Japan, for instance, and look at their data for how many households are in the market, and they may collect this totally differently. It may not be based on people. It may not be their demographics might be different. Like if I'm selling a children's product, well, households in the United States might represent 2.5 children per household. In Japan, it might be less than 1. And then validation. Can I take the research that I get, the secondary data, and validate it based on things that I know? So I may have data that's very reliable or past experience that's very reliable. And in order to see if the secondary data is useful to me, I need to be able to validate it with the existing data that I have that I can rely on. Primary research. So we kind of went backwards. Did secondary first. Primary research can be even trickier than secondary research in foreign markets. So there's 2 types, qualitative and quantitative. If I do quantitative data, that's like I'm going to go and measure how many TVs are in the average household. It's going to result in a number. Where qualitative data, maybe I'm going to go interview people about their feelings about TV. And so it could still be super valuable in terms of understanding the sentiment about my product or analogous products, but the quantitative data is going to be less subjective than the qualitative. So an example is a focus group. A focus group is primarily qualitative data. This is where we're getting a lot of people's opinions around a certain product. Do they like it? Do they not like it? Do they like the color? Do they like the way that it functions, how it feels, whatever the attributes are of the product? Or it may be just about their sentiments towards certain categories of products. Well, in Confucian societies, focus groups can be difficult. Focus groups are kind of a staple of marketing research, especially where you have bigger budgets in the United States. But if I take and try to do the same thing in Asian countries, could be a lot more difficult. How come? Well, it may be that people aren't. They have a cultural reason for not wanting to be open, not wanting to honestly share their feelings. There could be taboos. Maybe there's a product that affects their sexual health or their reproductive health, or maybe just medical issues, and they have a reason for wanting to keep that private, and it's not something that they share. It could be that it violates taboos in their culture. It may be that certain topics are off limits, or they're the kind of thing that you only talk about with a religious leader or a close family member, and that could be a reason why you don't have an openness to what they really think and feel. Personal info, they might feel like it's intrusive. They may be more private. Or fear of taxation, like you may be asking them questions about their demographics, and you're thinking, okay, what income bracket are you in? Well, maybe they work a regular job, but then they work a job on the side where they get paid into the hand and they don't pay taxes. They may be afraid that if they report that to you, then the government will find out about their other income and come and tax them. There are cultural differences in just how open people are. Also about if they're open to being critical. So where you may be vitally interested in critiques of your product. Where is this product going wrong? They may not feel that they can do that. They may feel like that to tell you what they don't like about your product would be rude and therefore not culturally acceptable. And then they may not have the language skills, or it may just be that the communication between you and they is going through an intermediary, an interpreter, and that could make it to where what the information that you get is unclear. So you could ask a question and the response you might interpret one way when it was intended to be something else. So all of these complicate they complicate the process of doing primary research in a foreign country. Here's an example in terms of language barriers. This is the Indian 20 rupee note, and along the side here, do you see how many languages are listed? So you can see where it says Reserve Bank of India is in English, and the Hindi is across the top. But then there are an additional 13 languages, which are all considered primary in India, other than English, listed there.
So when I was really young, probably kindergarten or first grade, I have a much older brother, and we'd go out to recess, and there was this older guy, he might have been in like 5th or 6th grade, that always used to pick on us, and I didn't really know what to do about it, and I definitely looked up and completely trusted what my brother
Today we went to a high school, and I pet
I was posing for a picture with all of my girlfriends when all of a sudden one of them reached over.
Can you read my lips?
Can you read
My lips.
Can you read?
Can you read my lips? Can you read her lips?
My God, Clementine loves bread. She stole a loaf off the counter.
Can you read his
I
lips?
have 2 dogs, one boxer, she's 7.5, and one mixed breed who's 8.
I am deaf, but my word. What the f is a hearing one? I rely on the visual, not the auditory. The word lip reading implies reading, like reading a book
whose text is legible and clear.
But the human face isn't a book, and lip reading isn't reading. People mumble, people talk fast and laugh loudly, people have facial hair like open eyes, lips like sphincters, people cover their mouths, people have accents. But real conversations don't take place in a studio.
Growing up, I used to...
I'm putting together a puzzle without all the pieces. I look in on your mouth. I try to grasp with one sense information intended through another. There have been times when I've questioned why I even tried to lip read. The way through this is wrong. When I could just use sign language. Some deaf people choose to do just that. It's like a different world. A world filled with rich expression and culture. When people sound, they come alive. But I know I want both worlds. Communication is never a given.
Tuesday, I woke up, had a
She
rash.
just pulled my dress down.
When I was little, my family got a cat.
Like, why don't you
Wednesday
just
morning,
hit him in the
I
face?
held a
That was like the last thing that I ever
guinea
was.
pig.
Last winter I learned how to ski. I only cried twice.
But when the reading works, when I focus on one legible face and launch into a conversation, something clicks. Right then, I feel something extraordinary.
Implies
Human
reading connection.
Connection.
Okay, so use this example of somebody who's deaf and whose native language is ASL and who's a native of deaf culture to kind of give you a taste of the barrier that you have to bridge in order to communicate effectively in another culture, and how important that communication can be to the effectiveness of your marketing research. This is a good example, right? How many of you have been on a customer service call with somebody whose English or whose accent was hard for you to understand? We see customer service and survey research outsourced to places where the labor is cheap, and what's the requirement for English speaking abilities. If any of you have seen Outsourced, right? There's a movie about what this is like in India, but it underscores part of the problem, right? You want this communication to happen, but what if you're hiring a company in India to do marketing research, and because of the accents of the people doing surveys or whatever, your target market isn't open to telling them what they really feel, or the data that they collect becomes corrupted. It can be a really big problem. So let's list these out, right? Problems with primary data. How reliable is the list? If we're sending out surveys and we want them to get back, the Postal Service may not operate to the same level that you're used to in the United States. The government data, right? Census data, socioeconomic data. If it's collected by the government, it's going to be limited to the effectiveness of the government in collecting that data, which it could be awesome or it could be really poor. What about phones? If you're in a country where fewer people have phones, then you may have less ability to survey. Also, the cost of postage, the ability to get an appropriate sample size so that you know that your research is delivering data on a representative sampling of the population. Language and comprehension, right? You've got to translate it going out and coming back. There's all of the communication barriers that effectively turn up to junk up your data. They give you bad marketing research data, which ultimately increases your risk of making a bad marketing decision. Okay, so that's qualitative. Let's look at quantitative. Excuse me. So some people don't want to respond. Some cultures don't have they don't feel a cultural imperative to respond, or they may feel an imperative not to respond. They may feel that it is courteous to always respond in the affirmative. They may go along with what they hear. So if one person says yes, they may also go along with that. Or they may be inclined to yay say or nay say. Whether they feel like that the product is going to reflect well on them, or the research process is going to reflect well on them. Sometimes income and gender-related questions can be off limits or uncomfortable for them to talk about to somebody they don't know, somebody that they have such a casual relationship with as a researcher. What about doing research online, right? We can pull a lot of quantitative data off the internet, and sometimes this data is good. I mean, there's population data for just about every country, income data for just about every country, and the ability to use the internet to send out surveys, right? To do online surveys, use a SurveyMonkey or something like that. In fact, in another week or so, you'll be getting the mid-course survey from me about how you feel things are going in the course so far. Totally electronic, totally internet-based. Depends on internet access. So, is there internet infrastructure in the countries where you're trying to do this research? Is your research mobile friendly? Can they do it on their phones if that's their primary way of accessing the internet? So we do online surveys and buyer panels. We can actually do an online focus group. We could pull together people from all over the country and do a WebEx or a GoToMeeting and get people's input. We have analytic data with about internet trends and research. Right? If you've ever built a website, Google Analytics is free. You can track how many people are coming, what search terms they're entering in. A lot of really important data, their physical location, or at least the location of their IP address, and those become important quantitative measures. And we can measure the effectiveness of advertising online probably better than a lot of the mass channels. If I send out, I can use a service like Nelson. A lot of the cable companies and even like Netflix, where they have internet-based tracking of watching statistics. Another resource on this is like Wistia. YouTube gives us a little bit, but if I use Vimeo or Wistia, it gives me more data about did people watch my ad. So the internet gives us some ways to track this. You'll notice that these are things that kind of happen anonymously. So I'm going to do this in the background. I don't have to actually engage with a person in the target market and ask questions and get responses. And there's different ways of identifying customers. So if you're in an industry where you're using a marketing automation system like Marketo or HubSpot or Infusionsoft, one of those, they're able to essentially, when a visitor hits your website, they place a cookie on their browser, and then they track what they do. And if that person ever converts, if they ever fill out a lead generation form or whatever, they can backfill the data about what that customer's behavior was. And all of that is available online. And of course, email marketing, right? Email is, you guys probably all get plenty of spam, but email marketing is still one of the most effective digital advertising approaches. And then embedded research. So if data that's embedded inside web properties, inside applications, that lets you see, okay, when did this user log in? How much time are they spending on the site, etc. So we talked about using agencies. We talked about this in the advertising section. Well, this is a revisit of exactly how those relationships can take place. So you could hire an agency like Dow Jones to say, Dow Jones, we want you to do some focus groups for us. And the question becomes, well, do I hire the agency domestically, or do I hire the agency in the foreign market? Do I use a combination of the two? So let's look at these real quick. First one, option A. Company hires an agency domestically. That agency goes to the foreign market and does the customer research there. Option B. Company hires an agency who coordinates with a local agency, and that local agency interfaces with the customers in the target market. Option C, the company could hire somebody, or could have a branch in the foreign market that's then going to hire a local agency to interact with customers. And then, or the company could cross borders themselves and go directly into the market, find an agency there and hire them to do the market research. Okay, that's the end of our conversation around Chapter 8. I do have a couple of slides here as we talk about the case for Euro Disney. I will open a discussion on Canvas where you can post your feelings about that along with the write-ups that you submit. So tell me what you think the protagonist should do. If you're Disney, you've got this problem. You just spent a ton of money. You designed your park with some cultural problems embedded in it. Some of those have to do with the joint venture that you put together in order to do this park. But the European market is huge. It seems so attractive, and yet Euro Disney's opening and not getting the traffic that it needs in order to do well. So the questions about exactly what you should do we'll talk about in the discussions and in your papers, but the perspective is you should be putting yourself in the shoes of Disney and asking yourself, okay, I'm in charge of marketing at Disney. What do I do? Here's the problems that we're having. How do I solve them? Here's a couple of fun things. So for one thing, French consumers and United States consumers are different. This is from a French paper describing the difference between a French family, typical French family, and a typical U.S. family. Some things to notice here is, one is the French family are super skinny and they're all smoking. The French children are effectively miniature adults. The American family are overweight and slovenly. Their eyes are closed because they're kind of ignorant of the things that are going on around them. And the kids are militant and drinking, instead of cigarettes and wine, they're drinking Coke. This is a copy of what the tickets, the very first opening day tickets to Euro Disney looked like. So the problems with Disney did not escape the attention of the news. Over here on up front, right, Euro Disney looking Euro dismal. Or the Wall Street Journal, right? Despite losses and bailouts, France stays devoted to Disney. So Disneyland, or Disney, the parent company, is committed to never closing the park. But that's a heavy, heavy financial commitment. In France, oui to bailout, no to layoffs. So labor issues in France are a big issue, and how Disney went about hiring their staff was one of the problems. Disney to bail out French partners. So ultimately the Disney mothership. This was in 2014, right? It's not too long ago. Definitely post the date on the case. The Disney mothership effectively had to take over the joint venture, and the only way they could do that was to buy them out with a gigantic amount of money. Right? I think what that 420 million euro, about $520 million. Minority shareholders waged legal battle over Euro Disney. So when there's a problem, when things are going good, everybody's happy to get out the knives and forks when it's time to split the pie. When things are going bad, things get ugly. When people feel like that they are missing out on money that they should get, you can have all kinds of things happen. And this is the nature of business. So in this case, you've got the minority shareholders trying to say, hey, we didn't get our fair distributions because Disney used an accounting practice that undervalued the Euro Disney. So in Disney, there was an analogous example in the case about Disney Hong Kong. This is a case in Disney Hong Kong where they actually oversold. They weren't expecting the amount of traffic on the first day. And so this guy is trying to, the Disney employees on the left are trying to prevent this guy from chucking his kid over the wall since she has a ticket. And she wants to go to Disney and he wants to get her there. And they're like, yeah, we're full. We're at capacity. Here's a look at the Disneyland Paris as it was renamed, their park attendance from 1993 when it opened until 2016. So you can see that they've had some better years since the beginning, right? They started at 8 and 9 million visitors, but also it looks like they kind of peaked in 2011, and or it looks like 2012, and in 2013, now in 2016, they're down about 10% over the year before. So what are the retrospective details that we want to know? Well, they completed phase 2, so that decision was made. They lowered the ticket prices to entice more visitors, 25% for adults, 33% for kids. In 1995, they changed the name to Disneyland Paris instead of Euro Disney, and then they added Disneyland Paris and Resort in 2002. So 2016 revenue, last year's revenue, was 1.2 billion euro. That still gave them a net loss of 858 million euro. And what's the reason? Well, they still have this huge debt service for the buyout. The other thing that's crippling them in the last couple of years is after the terrorist attacks in Paris and in Nice, the tourism took a hit in France. Also, the Brexit made it to where it was difficult for UK visitors to afford. I mean, Brexit's still a little unsettled, exactly how that will work, but foreign exchanges are pricing in the potential of the Brexit, and it's making it tougher for UK visitors to come to Disney Paris. And then the visitorship is down about 10%. So what's the lesson with the Euro Disney case? The main lesson is here you have probably one of the most valuable brands in the world, one of the best companies at branding in the world, and in Disneyland Paris, they essentially flubbed it. And so this is tough. It's tough to do an international company and do it right. Okay, so for next week, there's some discussion questions to respond to. Also, Learn Smart for chapters 7 and 8 are due by the 8th. And then also exam number 2, which covers chapters 5 through 8, is due next week. That's it. Thank you very much.